to retain that business, but you also need to be on an ongoing basis prospecting for new business.
Well, in that renewal business, that tends to be where folks seem to be comfortable. It's easier to make sure that you're constantly renewing and recapturing that same old business. But there's that acquisition, and I always look at the acquisition side. If I want to grow, then I need to have some kind of program in place. Actually,
Right.
you and I give a presentation. Oh, I'm giving a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about at the end, but have presentations about how to continually to help grow your business from a planning aspect and things like that. Now, your background is 30 plus years at FedEx, not a small company, not even a medium-sized company.
True.
And I've had the opportunity to work with many large global organizations over the years. And one of the things as a consultant, as I start to speak to businesses in the small to medium-sized area, they push back a little bit and say, well, you've got all this big brand experience. That's not our company. I don't know how we relate to what you did for, let's say, Purina or Unilever, bringing down to my small $30 million company. And I always debate that with them because to me it's about the skill set and not necessarily how much money my clients had to do some of the marketing activities. So does that happen to you, and how do you address that coming out of 30 years of a large corporation?
Yes, it absolutely does. And, I spent, like you said, 30 years at FedEx in a variety of sales and sales leadership roles. And, when clients engage with me, what I'm bringing to the table is my experience and expertise in building and leading high-performance sales teams. That's what I do. And the conversation that I have with prospective clients is simply this. My focus is on the fundamentals and ensuring that you've got the right people, the right process, and subsequently the right performance that's going to allow you to achieve sustainable revenue growth. Just the fundamentals, just the basics. That's what we're going to be focused on. So we're not going to engineer something like we would for a $65 billion company like FedEx.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to engineer something that works for you at 5 million, 25 million, 50 million, whatever your revenue spot is. Because, Angelo, you and I mean, we're really focused on that small to the lower part of the mid-market, right? Typically it's $100 million or
Exactly.
less in annual revenue. And these are companies that focusing on the fundamentals and being able to execute them is the difference between surviving versus thriving,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think that the strategies we use, I mean, there's some just consistencies, and to your point, the basics. What marketing is marketing is marketing, and if we really understand our kind of value propositions and to be able to work within whatever those frameworks happen to be. So, when I talk to many small, medium-sized businesses, the founder, in many cases, is still there. They are the chief sales officer, marketing officer, operations officer, and janitor.
Right.
And so making that transition from doing everything or certainly leading the sales charge to being more in that leadership role where you're now empowering other people, it's difficult to make that transition. So in your experience, what advice can you give the listeners that are in that about how to be more efficient in that transition and really kind of change the game?
Right. It's very common in terms of like you said, the owner, CEO, they're the chief sales officer. And unfortunately, that's not scalable. You'll get to an inflection point with revenue where you can't grow any higher than you're currently at because that owner, that CEO, they're running the business. They don't have time to be full-time sales and full-time marketing and full-time operations and be the CEO, right? The visionary leader that they're supposed to be for the company from a strategy standpoint. So you get to that point. It's a nice problem to have where, all right, we've grown pretty quick. And now I'm at a point where, the business needs me to step back and be the true CEO or owner, and I need to bring somebody in who's got expertise in a variety of disciplines that can help take us to that next level. So, whether that's working with somebody like me or trying to do it on their own, sourcing the ideal sales candidate or candidates that could come in and help effectively prospect and convert new business and continue that growth trajectory, I mean, that's really the next step in the process. And it can be challenging for owners and CEOs to navigate that. But again, with people like you and I that, bring a lot of expertise to the table, we can come alongside of them and help in that journey. And probably the most important part of it, help them source top talent that will, contribute to their success going forward.
So what are some guidelines? I mean, we have talked, and I've had other people on my show, and we talk about talent acquisition and really identifying, Jim Collins, putting the right people on the bus,
right,
and maybe even swapping them around in the seats. So what are some kind of strategies that some of the listeners could put into place when they really start thinking about the right people to bring on board?
Right. Well, great question. And I totally agree with you. I think first things first, you really need to be able to spec out what's that ideal candidate profile look like? What's the skill set that you need, the background and experience that you have? I would submit to you it's more important to bring somebody in who's got sales DNA in their blood than it is to bring in somebody who is an expert in your particular industry. And the reason I say that is this. You can very quickly immerse somebody in a specific industry, and over a period of 30, 60, 90 days, they can become pretty knowledgeable. I mean, it's not that hard to pick that up. Mm-hmm. But you cannot just bring somebody in who's never sold before or frankly is not wired to be a salesperson, to bring them in and to teach them the nuances of how to sell and to have that personality where you've got a strong ego drive. You're self-motivated, you're resilient. You need to be, because you're going to get a lot of no's. You're very disciplined in terms of how you organize your time and where you spend your time. You're able to successfully overcome customer prospect objections. You're able to motivate prospects to say yes, so they sign that contract, they start doing business with you, and then you have the ability, depending on the company and what you want from the rep, to also build and retain that relationship so they continue to do business with you. Those are things that are really hard to develop, and it takes time. So if sourcing somebody who's got that type of skill set, they're bringing that to the table. They don't need the industry piece. You can teach them that. You can train them that. But the other stuff, I would submit to you, either you have the DNA to be a good salesperson or you don't. You can't coach to it. If you don't have it, you can't coach to it. If you're an introvert, if you don't like being in front of people and telling your story and getting a lot of no's, you're not going to do well.
Yeah, sales is not where you want to be.
No, it's not. You got to play to your strengths, right? So that process of the ideal candidate profile. What do you in terms of prioritization, right? Here's the most important thing. Number one, sales DNA, right? Number two, maybe somebody who's got a few years of experience in that sales field, because you could be wired for sales but never sold before. And then maybe number three, nice to have, was the industry experience piece. Maybe you look for that as well. And then within that, depending on your company, you've got salespeople that have experience selling to large companies, enterprise type sales, and those that sell to small, medium-sized companies. So sometimes when you get into the weeds, sometimes you're looking for different levels of specialization and background and experience. So that's part of it. The other part of it is how you're going to source your talent. I would submit to you, in the market we're in today, unemployment rates at 50-year low, and it's a good growing economy. The demand for top sales talent is fierce. And if you're just putting a job out there on LinkedIn or Indeed, and you're hoping you're going to get a good candidate, I think it's just not going to happen. And, when you post jobs on mediums like that, you're getting folks that are actively looking for a job. You really want to be looking for the folks that aren't looking for a new job, passive candidates that have the skill set that you're looking for. What's great about salespeople, they love to brag, the good ones. So, you look at LinkedIn profiles and they'll have all the bullet points of all the business they closed and how they went to President's Club or top rep of the year or whatever it might be. And I really would strongly recommend to your listeners, again, working with someone like me or working with a recruiting company that specializes in sourcing top sales talent. I really think that's a good approach. Yes, it's more expensive than just putting something on LinkedIn and then just scanning through a bunch of resumes that you receive. But working with a partner that can help sift through all the resumes that come in, and really look at your ideal candidate profile, and screen those candidates, and then put in front of you some finalists that are really a perfect fit for your company and what you're looking for. That's ideal. And once you've done that, then of course it becomes having a compelling value proposition in terms of the company and benefits and all that stuff.
Right. Well, it's really important. I mean, what you're saying is so important these days because unemployment is low, and people that you might want to bring on board are not necessarily people looking for a job. I mean, and some of the latest statistics that I've quoted before, about 34% of people are quitting 90 days after they start.
Right.
And a number I saw the other day that when you lose somebody, it's basically about 40% of what you just paid to bring them on board. So that onboarding process and the training process and really making sure that you've got the right person, which really leads me to my next question, right? You can't have sales without a sales team. And, frankly, you can't have a business without customers, so it becomes really important. So when you think about onboarding, that process when you bring somebody on, a lot of companies don't necessarily spend and invest the time. They're anxious to get them out into the field and start to sell. I jokingly say this, but it's based on a true story. Somebody got hired on a Monday. They gave them a catalog that afternoon, and on Wednesday morning they patted him on the butt and said, "Hey, get out there and sell, buddy." And he had no idea the culture, the brand, the product, and he just didn't understand. Versus if they took the time, what I've seen other companies, and really immerse themselves. Another company I did work for, a salesperson couldn't even walk out into the street, if you will, without 3 weeks of immersion. Mm-hmm. Now, I thought that might have been a little too much, but there's a balance there somewhere. So talk a little bit about onboarding and in your experience, what you think is a good framework for onboarding a new salesperson or an employee in general.
Sure. Now, well, specific to sales, you're right. I mean, the first part is hiring the right person, and then the next part is being able to retain them and help them achieve their maximum potential. And really, that's about, you're right, there's so many things that are there. It's that onboarding process and how you quickly assimilate them into the culture of your company, right? And what you represent, what you stand for. And so here's your overarching values, your mission in terms of why you exist as a company. And then, in terms of serving your clients, what's your value proposition, the history of the company, all that stuff. You really need, it's like, okay, you're starting, Angelo, congratulations, welcome to the team. And it's a Monday morning. Okay, now what? Right. And so you're part of a bigger team. So, get you assimilated with those folks, getting to know you on a personal level, helping educate you quickly as to what we do and who we serve and what that looks like. And then when you get into the weeds for sales, all right, so what are the job expectations? What does success look like? What do you expect of me? What are the activities and behaviors that will help me deliver on the results that you're looking for? So you really need to have a foundation, a selling foundation that talks to those things. So, here's your territory, right? Your area of responsibility. These are the accounts that, if they have existing customers that are assigned to you, or here's the pool that we want you to prospect in. Mm-hmm. We're going to have you specifically sell to this industry or these size companies. And this is what that looks like. Here's how you talk about our product or service. And here are the common objections that you're going to hear. Here are the key competitors that will come up in that conversation. Here's how you overcome that. Here's how we differentiate ourselves from those competitors, right? So a lot of this ties into your overarching sales strategy. And of course, as you know, that sales strategy should be an extension of your brand and that marketing messaging that you have, within the area that you're selling. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, everything needs to be in alignment. And when they are, companies thrive. So for that rep, it's probably a good 60 to 90 days for them to assimilate and they some level of industry expertise, role playing, ongoing coaching. where you're kind of role playing and helping them and modeling what good looks like, right? Ideally you have them mentored with a more tenured rep and they're bringing them out on sales calls and they're seeing, what that looks like. How do you conduct a call? What's the dialogue that comes up? How do you overcome objections?
So
all that.
Really a plan. I mean, they
Right.
need a plan
Yes.
to onboard and train. That's
A
the other
roadmap.
thing, a roadmap,
Yes,
right?
yes.
A lot of times you spend your time onboarding and then they do the annual training
Yeah.
and a lot of things happen. And my question is always, well, that's great. You do your annual training in January and you hire somebody in June. How do they get the training? How do
Right.
we make sure that everybody is getting the same immersion, if you will, into the business? Where do companies typically fail when it comes to putting these kinds of programs in place?
Assuming that, begin with the end in mind, assuming they're sourcing the right candidate for the role that they're hiring for, it's the things you just talked about. That rep shows up and there's no process, there's no foundation, there's no roadmap or operating manual, right? They're left to kind of fend on their own. They have a coffee conversation with the owner or the person that hired them, and then they're basically given their access to the kingdom in terms of the clients that they want them or prospects they want them to target, and maybe they take them on a sales call or two. That coaching and assimilation process is so critical. That first 90 days, it's make or break. You talked about how what the percentage was of people that wash out within 90 days, 6 months, whatever. It's huge, and it's because companies don't do a good job in this space. So really, if you're hiring your first rep ever, you need to have this foundation in place before you do it. And if you have an existing team and you're looking to add to that, right, it's important to look at what you have in place. What does that look like? What's that onboarding process look like? And get feedback from employees that have gone through it, that work for you already. They can tell you what they liked and what they didn't like and what they think is missing. You don't have to do everything. The fallacy of an owner, business owner, you and I can relate to this, right? We have to do everything. There's a lot of expertise that's out there on your team. Tap into it.
Okay. Well, I hate to bring this conversation to a close, and as typically it goes by very fast. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We may have to do this again. So why don't you tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you and all your good contact information?
Sure. Yes, the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. It's Rich Cocuzzo. You can also contact me directly, 949-981-2161, or rccocuzzo@gmail.com. But Angelo, thank you for having me on the show today. It was a real pleasure.
Well, absolutely. So one of the questions we didn't get to is how sales and marketing relate to each other. And we have that symbiotic relationship, which is great. Sales and marketing have finally got together and made it happen, ladies and gentlemen. So on April 4th, Rich and I are actually holding a workshop, and sales and marketing are the growth engines for your business. And you could check us out on Eventbrite. We encourage you to sign up and attend that event. Hopefully that'll be the first of many. Thank you again. Thank you again for joining us at the cafe today. You can find out more about me and read my blogs, watch my show videos at theponzigroup.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And you can subscribe to this show at the Business Growth Cafe, or we are now on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spreakers, and other platforms around the world. Join me next week for lunch at the Business Growth Cafe.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Cafe with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.